Hello and welcome! Christine E. Schulze here, your favorite Elvish author. And today again I have my lovely boyfriend Isaac.
Hello!
And welcome back to Chapter Reactions, where we read from books to help you discover new books that you might want to read for yourself. Now, we don't usually read the whole book. We usually read a couple of chapters to kind of introduce ourselves and kind of introduce you to the book to see if it's something you'd want to go ahead and go on to read. But this is something special that we're doing. We've started reading my fan fiction that I wrote, my Legend of Zelda fan fiction, Demon Queen. It is, Skyward Sword in the sense that you do have Ghirahim in the prologue. We had Demise. If you haven't watched the prologue, you should go watch the prologue.
And play the game.
And play the game, yes, that'd be very good. And there's also going to be some crossover to do with Ocarina of Time in here as well. So we're just going to jump in and continue with Chapter 1. Strap on your elf ears and get ready to listen. Where are your elf ears? Very good. Alright, Chapter 1 of Demon Queen. Some weeks earlier, before the prologue, bright golden white light blinded Ghirahim. He raised his arm, shielding his face till his eyes adjusted to the unusual glow. In the blink of an eye, his master's power had transported him from the pits of the dark realm, where shadow and flame ever reigned. Twilight ruled the heavens there, so that day was never ruled by a light any brighter than the silver hue of his eyes. Thus, he had forgotten the natural brilliance that dominated the surface, or the above, as he and his kind now called it. Ghirahim blinked a few more times, and at last his surroundings came into focus. He stood in a cavernous room. Gray walls towered high on all sides. Arched windows allowed the white sunlight to pour in. Silence shrouded the place, though not the silence he was accustomed to. The dark realm was a place of aloneness. No friends dwelled there. One was lucky to find an ally or two to ward off the undead who constantly sought to frighten the many poor trapped souls. Ghirahim had always found their presence irritating more than anything. After all, he was a demon lord. He feared nothing. No, this place was shrouded in a different kind of silence, one he couldn't quite place a finger on. As he whirled about, his cape swished, breaking the calm in a way that made him freeze in place. He was momentarily amused that the subtle sound should catch him so off guard. Then, his glance fell upon a long stone altar at the far end of the room. 3 stones gilded in gold, one red, one blue, and one green, hovered over the altar. Beyond, stone doors towered high, and above them rested a familiar symbol, 3 golden triangles, the Triforce. Ghirahim would never forget its shape, just as he would never forget the Spirit Maiden and chosen hero who had stolen it from his master, along with his glory, and along with Ghirahim's own personal glory. Where are we? Where are we? Where's the location?
Sounds like the Temple of Time.
Very nice. Ghirahim had been sent to the above for the same purpose as before, to prepare the way for his master's return to power. His master, Demise, the great demon king of the dark realm, had once tried to take the Triforce, the gift of the gods, for his own. Ghirahim had helped him, had practically delivered the Spirit Maiden for sacrifice into his hands. Demise had thrown it all away, by allowing the chosen hero, that insipid, blonde-haired fool of a boy, to defeat him in battle. What a mockery! What a slap in the face! All the work Ghirahim had put into making things as easy as possible for his master, months of toil and chasing and battling, all thrown away in a matter of moments. What had cut Ghirahim deepest of all was the fact that not only had Demise not shown a shred of gratitude for his efforts, but now his master would accuse him of being the cause of his fall. He had sent Ghirahim here, to the above, to correct his mistakes, to get things right the second time around. Ghirahim had agreed, playing the part of the doting servant he had once been. But Ghirahim had other plans, especially in that moment, as he realized where he stood. He stood inside a temple. The Triforce crest and the altar with the magic stones promised as much. Suddenly, he understood why even the smallest sound seemed to shake the place's entire spirit. This place was filled with power, hidden power, just waiting to be unleashed by the right touch. This place demanded reverence. Ghirahim crept forward toward the altar. If only he could get his hands on the shining stones, surely they would hold powers he had only ever dreamed of obtaining, powers that would let him take Hyrule for himself. Indeed, they might even open the stone doors and lead him to the Triforce. After all, was he not a great demon lord, commander over many armies of the undead, evil spirits, and beasts of the dark realm, Why should his focus be on making the way ready for demise? Why not seek to make his own way? Why should he be bound all his life to an ungrateful master who had already proven himself incompetent? He could be his own master, have his own power and kingdom and glory. In doing so, not only could he set himself up as a proper lord, and he was well entitled to after his hard work the first time around, but he could enact his own sweet revenge on the demon who called himself king. King indeed. What a laugh. If Demise had done things right, Hyrule could be his right now, and all the demon lords of the Dark Realm could be getting fat and drunk on the plenty of the above. Ghirahim pulled closer to the altar and walked up the stone steps ever so carefully, expecting some beast or guard or other trap to spring at him. When nothing happened, he sped his pace. Perhaps he had caught a break at last. Perhaps the Hylians had grown careless in their security over the past several hundred years. Even if he met with guards or other obstacles outside, his magic could surely handle them. Out of practice as he was still far superior in power to any mortal. He reached out his hand toward the ruby-red stone. His fingertips grazed its surface. A blazing pain shot up his arm, and he was sent spiraling backward through the air, as though an invisible fist punched him away from the stones. He crashed hard and slid across the floor. Drawing his rapier, he caught it on the ground and used it to slow himself, just preventing a crash into the wall behind him. For a moment, he lay breathless. Then, he prized himself from the floor and sheathed his blade. Drawing himself up into his proud and grateful stance, he glared at the stones. Their tempting shimmer seemed to mock him. What foolery on his part. He should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Never mind. He would simply have to find his rise to power by other means, whether that meant coming back once he had learned how to harness the power of the stones, or whether that meant trying another tactic altogether. The first order of business should be stepping outside and gathering his bearings. When last he had visited the above, this temple hadn't even existed. It was likely the terrain had also been much changed in other ways over the years. Ghirahim turned back toward the way he had come. Directly across from him, two large double doors loomed. One of the doors was swung open wide, allowing the sunlight to dazzle upon a golden crest on the floor. Again, the Triforce. Ghirahim recognized the slightly raised platform as the place he had first appeared in the above. Should he ever have need to transport back to the Dark Realm, perhaps this place held the proper magic in which to do so. Upon exiting the temple, strains of lively music faintly reached his ears. A wall rose beyond the trees surrounding the temple. Just above the wall, rooftops could be made out, and in the farther distance, flags waved atop towers of a massive building built on the crest of a hill. Ghirahim crept toward it, but soon found that it too was enclosed by a thick stone wall. Not the walls were of any obstacle to someone with his prowess for climbing and leaping, but walls likely meant something resided within that was meant to be kept safe, and that meant a possibility for guards. While humans posed no threat, he didn't yet know what kind of magical powers or beasts these humans might use, best to maintain some air of caution despite his itch for action. He veered instead toward the music. A gate stood open in the wall. He passed through into the bustling town beyond and paused for a moment to soak in the spectacle. Men and women of all ages and colors and sizes hurried to and fro between the various houses and shops. Children chased after a dog who barked and danced through the crowds. The music flowed from a group of musicians playing flutes, drums, shakers, harps across the square. Merchants rolled carts through the streets, shouting their wares. Whether or not they had grown in strength, the Hylians had certainly grown in number since Ghirahim had last set foot in the above. Ghirahim drew his cloak about his shoulders and glided into the square, meshing perfectly with its busy flow. He wandered toward the musicians, taking a moment to glance down one of the streets. Between the houses, the great building with the flags rose into view. Its shape more distinct now, he recognized it as a castle. Why, Demise's spell had led him right to the seat of royalty. Perhaps his quest for glory lay not in the temple, but in abducting power directly from its source. Upon reaching the musicians, Ghirahim joined the throngs that gathered around them. He stayed on the outskirts, listening. Some of the people danced about, while others clapped and laughed merrily. Ghirahim listened to the music for a few moments before allowing his ear to wander. He kept his gaze focused on the musicians, but that was as far as his attention focused on them. He began tuning into the conversations surrounding him, until at last one in particular piqued his interest. "I wasn't thrilled to come here and make the trade," the woman said, "what with the raids going on, but my husband insisted." "Never fear, my good woman," said one of the men standing beside her. "The Sheikah Guard are the strongest protectors Hyrule has ever seen. They will not fail us, should we come under siege again." "There have been some close calls already," said another of the men. "You must admit it. The Gerudo are ruthless." "Who are they?" the woman asked, "and from whence do they hail? My husband says they're a band of female thieves. That hardly sounds like something the Sheikah should have a problem with if they're as strong as the stories about them claim. The Gerudo are female thieves, yes, but more than thieves, they are warriors, very skilled in the arts of swordplay, archery, and very full of cunning. They come to town and make off with our men and women like thieves in the night. What? The woman gasped. So they are kidnappers yet, too? Yes, no one is certain what they do with those they capture, but no one who is stolen away has ever returned to town either. Their hearts are fueled by bitterness. They yet loathe the king for banishing them to the desert. Surely they were banished for good reason. They should not have betrayed His Majesty's trust in the first place. Pfft, they still deny betraying His Majesty at all. What do you expect from thieves? Of course, they will be liars as well. If His Majesty doesn't do something soon, they are getting out of control. Talk of war is on the horizon. Their conversation soon drifted to less intriguing topics, but Ghirahim was content. He had learned enough. The kingdom was in a state of unrest. Discord bred weakness. Now would be a perfect time to plan his own attack on the throne. A hand on Ghirahim's shoulder made him whirl. You there. Yes, you, in the jester's garb. Ghirahim stared with disgust at the entourage addressing him. How dare they lay hands on him? How dare they throw such insults at him? It's not like they had room to talk. The host of mortals studying him with their suspicious stares looked truly ridiculous in their short, dark purple cloaks and hoods, silver breastplates with a bright red eye painted across their chests, and tattoos etched across their faces, necks, and hands. Ghirahim guessed most of their skin was destroyed by the inky designs. I am no court jester, he sneered. He tossed his cape over one shoulder and then threw his arms wide with dramatic flair. I am a great lord. I wear this diamond pattern as a symbol of the wealth, renown, and respect due to me. What kind of lord? The frontmost mortal, a man with a deep voice, demanded, looking unimpressed in the least. You are unfamiliar to us. I sense a power in him, said a woman standing just behind him. A dark magic. Shadow magic? No, not of our kind. Something deeper, much more ancient, something darker. Explain yourself, the man demanded. Who are you? From whence do you hail? And what business have you in His Majesty's city? Ghirahim took a step forward. The man was tall for a mortal, but Ghirahim's shadow stretched even over him. I am a guest in this city. I arrived mere moments ago. You might work on your manners of hospitality. I find them, at present, most unrefined. For example, instead of making me feel like I am under attack, you might properly introduce yourself. The man narrowed his gaze and seemed to ponder a few moments. Ghirahim basked in the silence dousing the square. A smirk pulled at the corner of his lips as he soaked up the attention of so many eyes suddenly turned upon him. Even the musicians had quieted their din to watch how the scene would play out. I am Itzel, leader of the Sheikah, the man said at last. We are shadow guardians, sworn to protect His Majesty and his family. There has been some unrest in these parts as of late. If you refuse to answer my questions, we will not be opposed to taking you prisoner until it is decided whether you are friend or foe. Let me question him here and now, the woman said. A scarf concealed the lower half of her face, but a fierceness leapt visibly in her dark crimson eyes. She stepped forward, placed a hand on Itzel's shoulder. Let me use my power. We are Sheikah. I do not know why we bother with such formalities when we can easily persuade the truth from him. Peace, Impa, Itzel said, shrugging his shoulder away. He glanced back at her, an obvious tenderness in his gaze. She looked frustrated, but he only said, We are also sworn to obey His Majesty. Not when doing so places His Majesty's safety in jeopardy. No one's safety is compromised here. Itzel turned back to Ghirahim. Isn't that true, stranger? Who are you, and what is your business in these parts? Explain yourself immediately, or we will be forced to take you in for questioning. Ghirahim's gaze strayed to Impa. The name rang with a bitter familiarity, and he cringed as though it had actual power to cause him pain. The servant of the goddess for whom this creature was named had thwarted many of his attempts to capture the goddess. In a past age, she had proven an unexpectedly powerful foe. If these shadow folk possessed any of her skill, they were not to be trifled with, not even by a demon lord. Of course, he could not reveal himself without a fight, but if that was the only path, then he would gladly walk it. He had come here to be feared, to be reverenced. He would gain no respect by hiding behind the mask of something he was not. Eyes continued to watch him all around the square. Many Hylians seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Itzel narrowed his gaze at Ghirahim, scrutinizing him. His limited patience was thinning, counting down on an invisible timer that would run out any moment. Pathetic humans, Ghirahim thought. Perhaps, if they cannot recognize my obvious beauty and terror, they will at least appreciate the good show. I am Ghirahim, Lord of Demons, and soon I shall be lord over all you mortals as well, when I take your kingdom, the one that was so rudely ripped from my master's hands, for my own. Ghirahim threw his hands in front of him and blasted Itzel back with a wave of shadow. Itzel spiraled through the air, slammed against one of the shops, and fell to the ground as limp as one of the dead fish in the cart next to him. Another of the Sheikah rushed to his side. Elation flitted through Ghirahim at the sight of him lying motionless, where before he had thrown around his authority. Gasps and screams rippled through the crowds. Some fled into the nearby shops or alleyways, while others watched him, frozen in place by their own fear and new awe as they realized what he was. The Sheikah who had gone to Itzel's aid glanced up, his face devoid of anything but sorrow and loss of hope. He's dead. A wave of pain flooded Impa's face. Excitement coursed through Ghirahim, filling every part of him as he watched her heart break before his very eyes. Her spirit, however, remained undaunted. Anger replaced the sadness as she took her place in front of the other Sheikah, and as they realigned themselves behind her as their new leader. Killing a Sheikah, she said. For such a crime, there can be only one suitable means of vengeance. Ghirahim threw a wave of energy at her. With a loud cry of rage, Impa slammed her fist into the ground. The ground trembled, and the shimmering purple shield sprang up, dispelling the attack. In the same breath, the other Sheikah drew bows and shot arrows at Ghirahim. He deflected with a twirl of his cape before casting fiery darts back at them. Impa cast another shield and hurled a massive shadow at Ghirahim. Ghirahim dodged, leaping high into the air and soaring up to stand atop one of the rooftops. "Fools!" he declared, glaring down at them. "You really think your mortal magic can best that of a true demon?" "We may be mortals," Impa shouted, "but our magic is not. It is a gift from the goddess, granted so that we might protect the royal family from the likes of you. Sheikah, assemble!" Sheikah jumped atop the roofs until Ghirahim was surrounded on all sides by purple-cloaked warriors, some with bows cocked, others with swords drawn or magic hovering at the ready in cupped palms. An irritated snarl ripped through his throat. He didn't have time for such nonsense, and he certainly didn't want to waste his energy on it. "We banish you from this city," Impa declared. "Leave now, and return to whatever hell you came from, or face the wrath of our vengeance." "I will not leave until you take me to his majesty," Ghirahim declared. "He owes me a throne, or at least his descendants do." Arrows and shadow magic bombarded Ghirahim on all sides, but he was ready. He flung his cape about till it was illuminated with a bright flame that burned the arrows to cinders. He caught the shadowy attacks in his hands and hurled them back at their masters. "Now!" another woman shouted at the top of her lungs. Ghirahim braced himself for another attack, but instead, as screams flooded the town, the Sheikah began leaping down from the rooftops into the streets below, chasing after the new dozens of mortals that had suddenly appeared. They also wore purple, and at first Ghirahim wondered if they were allies or reinforcements. But as they drew long curved swords, waging battle on the Sheikah, he was instantly intrigued. A diversion. This was his chance to flee. He ran down the length of the rooftop and prepared to dive off, over the wall into the field beyond. A bright light blinded him, and a noise like the crack of a whip made his ears bleed. He shielded his face, cursing beneath his breath. Then, when he looked up, Impa suddenly stood before him, balanced on the edge of the roof. She crouched, ready to spring at him with the long, thin sword clutched in one hand. "Don't you dare dream of it," Impa sneered. "I was taking my leave, as you wished," Ghirahim returned. "Would you now go back on your word?" "You murdered Itzel when he laid not a finger of harm against you." "On the contrary, he sought to wound my pride, my intelligence, my reputation. He refused to recognize me, and such an insult is greater than any mortal wound." "We'll see if that's true when I return you to the Dark Realm." Impa flew at him. Ghirahim had just enough time to draw his blade and counter her attack, which landed with such power against his that he staggered back, nearly tumbling off the roof. Quickly catching his footing, he blocked blow after blow that the Sheikah woman flung at him. "I should have known you were some new trick of the Gerudo," she shouted, her voice dripping venom as she pushed all of her strength into each attack. "I sensed the darkness in you from the moment I laid eyes on you. What are you, some servant that the witches had created for sport?" "I am no creation, save by the gods themselves. Handmade, unlike yourself, I'll guess, from your shoddy construction." Ghirahim blocked several more sword blows with one hand and flung fiery darts with the other. Impa swerved, dodged, and leapt over them with impressive ease. Ghirahim would have been amused at her skill, but he remembered how the chosen hero had bested him with similar unexpected skills. He wouldn't allow himself to repeat such a mistake. "Insolent fool," Impa hissed. "What about you? I ask you again, are you some new creation of the sorceresses?" What sorceresses? Ghirahim sneered. I told you, I am as much a creation of the gods as you would claim. Don't lie to me. The origin of your invention is plain. Those witches have no control over their magic. They are ever dabbling in arts they should leave alone. And now they cannot even control their latest creation. But I shall see to it they do not have to. She thrust her sword into the rooftop, which quivered and splintered. So the splinters rippled toward Ghirahim like an ocean wave, and he danced backward until he was forced to jump to a neighboring roof. Impa flew toward him through the air, and he showered her with a host of fiery darts. She began throwing up a shield, but not before one of the darts struck her leg, making her cry out in pain and tremble awkwardly through the air, flailing, panic springing to life inside her otherwise determined face. She reached out and caught herself on the edge of the roof. She struggled to pull herself up, and Ghirahim smirked as her fingers slipped and confusion filled her face. His fire's poison was spreading even more quickly than he would have hoped. A scream snapped his attention. He crept to the edge of the roof and peered over. The purple-clad mortals who had infiltrated the town with their curved swords appeared to all be women. Women with dark auburn hair, skin made golden from the sun, and figures fit and lined with muscle. While most of them fought, both against the Sheikah and the Hylian guards who had appeared in silver armor, a few darted through the streets, throwing food, clothing, and other wares into large sacks. Others wrestled men and women to the ground, binding them with ropes and carrying them through the streets out of sight. For mere mortal thieves, one had to appreciate their efficiency. The same scream drew Ghirahim's attention again, and as a blast of ice shot into the air, he leapt from roof to roof, pursuing it till at last his gaze rested on the source of the screams and the chaos causing them. One of the red-headed women, dressed in blue and silver instead of purple like her comrades, cast barrage after barrage of icy attacks. The magic spiraled from her hands in sporadic tendrils, almost like icy branches of lightning. Some of the ice met its targets, turning them to icy statues. Others were only partially frozen and fell to the ground, howling in pain. At least 24 Sheikah bounded after her, leaping from rooftops and through the streets, throwing shadow after shadow until at last one of their attacks found her. Shadowy coils wrapped around her ankles, making her crash to the ground. She continued to cast her ice magic, but her panic made her attacks less focused. Ice rebounded off walls and windows and everywhere except her captors. The Sheikah who had caught her pulled his shadowy reins tight, drawing her toward him. Other Sheikah threw out shadowy ropes, binding her wrists, her waist, her neck. Ice poured from her fingertips, but the Sheikah easily dodged while their shadows held her in place. "Sister!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs. She squirmed, fighting against her bonds, but could barely move as the Sheikah tightened them. One of the Sheikah walked forward, sword drawn. Ghirahim knew his intentions, and his mind spun to formulate the best plan. He flung a wild glance at the castle. He could attack now, while the Sheikah were distracted with this new foe, but more Sheikah would surely assail him at the castle. The only reason he had escaped Impa so easily was because one of his darts had found their mark, but the poison would wear off any moment, sending her back after him with just as much power, and with twice the anger she had come at him with before. This ice sorceress, and by Impa's words, she was not the only one, could prove a threat to his plans to take the throne. He hadn't counted on magicians standing in his way, but so he hadn't counted on the Sheikah and their magic either. The Gerudo, these women were the ones the townsfolk had spoken of creating disorder and chaos. They clearly had no respect for the throne. This sorceress was one of them. She was powerful, but still could not stand up to the Sheikah on her own. Despite his superior powers, Ghirahim would be a fool to do so himself. Even the greatest lords had servants to do their bidding, armies to do their fighting. After all, that was what he had been once, a servant. This sorceress, perhaps she could prove an ally. If he could show her that, with their powers combined, they might stand a chance to take down the throne that had so wrongly mistreated her and her kind. Ghirahim leapt down from the roof, spearing his sword through the Sheikah before he could spear his sword through the sorceress. Shadows assailed Ghirahim from all sides, but he raised his hand, drawing their power inside him before unleashing it in a volley of shadow and fire that boomeranged all around the street, knocking many of the Sheikah off their feet. Their concentration severed, the sorceress's bonds were loosened or destroyed altogether. Ghirahim pulled her to her feet, sliced through the rest of the shadowy ropes with his sword, and then pushed her ahead of him, commanding her to flee. She ran, flinging a wild glance over her shoulder. Ghirahim followed, throwing fire and shadow at the Sheikah as they recovered and charged after him. As Ghirahim burst into the square after the sorceress, chaos reigned on all sides. Sheikah, Gerudo, guards, townsfolk, all fought against each other. A few lay stunned or injured, or possibly dead. Ghirahim joined the fray, all the while lingering near the sorceress, who froze the feet of many a guard in their tracks. "Fall back!" a commanding voice pierced the raging symphony of battle noises. "Back to the gate! We have what we need! Fall back to the gate!" Someone flew across the square, and the Gerudo followed her, rallying around her like some magnet it could not help but be drawn to. Like the ice sorceress, she too wore a color different from the rest, a rosy pink. Ghirahim guessed she must be a leader of sorts, and as she blasted a horde of Sheikah away with streamers of fire, he knew that, at the least, she was another sorceress. They had nearly reached the gates when someone leapt in front of Ghirahim, pounding the ground and knocking him off his feet. Impa surged at him, sword raised high. In the next breath, a pillar of ice arched through the air, knocked the sword from Impa's hands, and encased it in a solid block of ice. The ice-encased sword slid across the ground and landed against a wall, but the ice was too thick to shatter. Impa glared after it, then at Ghirahim as he whisked past. As the ice sorceress rushed past him, he glanced at her and nodded in a sign of gratitude. A creaking noise brought Ghirahim's attention to the main gate. The drawbridge was being raised. They would be trapped inside, forced to finish the battle or die trying. Gerudo ran and climbed up the drawbridge, jumping over into the moat. Even once it was raised and sealed altogether, the fire sorceress stretched out her hands and blasted jets of flame till a hole was burned straight through. Gerudo dove through the hole, into the moat, and scrambled onto the shore beyond. The fire sorceress stood behind the drawbridge, encouraging them through and fending off guards and Sheikah with balls of flame. Just as Ghirahim prepared to duck through, she grabbed his arm and roughly spun him aside. "Sister!" the ice sorceress cried. "He saved my life! He is clearly not one of them!" "He is a demon," the fire sorceress said, glaring sharply at her sister. "Were you more attentive to your studies, you'd have recognized this immediately." "I am a demon," Ghirahim said, "but I do not serve these people. Your foes and mine, they are the same. Give me a chance to prove myself an ally, and I will help rid you of their tyranny for good." The fire sorceress narrowed her gaze at Ghirahim. Not a single glimmer of trust shone within her golden eyes. A scar stretched from her ear down to her chin, so faded that only the keenest eyes would have been able to detect it. Rather than marring her face, the scar beautified it in a way, giving her the look of a true warrior's ferocity. With a glance at the fresh hordes of Sheikah pouring toward them, she nodded and said, "Very well, you may come with us, for now." Ghirahim squeezed to the opening in the bridge. The ice sorceress was right on his heels. Just as he prepared to leap over the moat, she took his hand, froze a strip of water with her free hand, and left him to slide across. The fire sorceress was the last to leave. Finally, the Gerudo all stood beyond the moat, staring back at the town. Smoke rose beyond the wall where the fires had been struck. Many of the Sheikah stood atop the wall, arrows poised. Impa in their midst, right above the drawbridge. "Return the Hylians, or the battle does not end here," Impa commanded. The fire sorceress snapped her fingers. Several Gerudo hurried forward, dragging the Hylian men and women who had been bound and gagged and forcing them to their knees. The Gerudo drew their swords and rested the sharp blades at their captives' necks. The Hylians fidgeted, their screams muffled by the thick cloth stuffed inside their mouths, and their gaze clearly pleaded Impa. "The battle ends here, or their lives do," the fire sorceress said. "The choice is yours." Impa took a deep breath. As she glanced upon the Hylians' faces, she could not conceal her desperation to save them. She glanced then with question at the faces of her fellow Sheikah. "What's the matter?" Ghirahim called up, smirking with glee. "You made yourself their leader now. Yet you seem to possess neither the patience nor prowess of your predecessor. Not that his skill was much to speak of, considering the ease with which I took his life." Impa darted forward, but 4 other of the Sheikah rushed forward, grabbing and holding her back. She strained against them, gaze lit with fury. The Gerudo pressed their blades against the necks of the Hylians. Muffled screams sliced the air as thin trails of blood trickled down their skin and stained the ground below. Impa drew still, though her kin did not release their hold on her as she shouted, "Go then, be free, if only under the promise not to harm any of those you have taken today." The fire sorceress nodded. "You know I am nothing if not a woman of my word. They will not be harmed." She snapped her fingers again. The Gerudos sheathed their blades and dropped the Hylians, who fell to the ground, gasping and crying. "But do not think to come here again," Impa shouted. "We have shown you more than enough mercy in the past. Next time you assail our gates, we will be ready. We will be 1,000 times less merciful than what we have showed you today. Today was a mere taste of what awaits you, should you dare to attack our peaceful town again." "Then spend this time well. I'd say you've got a good month or so to prepare before we get bored and need to acquire a new entertainment. Wouldn't you say, ladies?" The fire sorceress swept a glance across the Gerudo, who snickered and nodded, some elbowing one another and whispering jokes about the incompetence of Hylian men. "It's been a beautiful fight, Impa, as ever," she continued. "Exhilarating, actually. The best fight you've given us in some time. But now we must take our leave. Till next time." She raised her hands and clapped them twice. The Gerudo turned and started trekking across the broad field, dragging their Hylian captives with them. Ghirahim cast a final challenging glance over his shoulder at Impa before turning to follow suit. The ice sorceress hurried up beside him and said, "Thank you for saving me back there." I would have had it, the fire sorceress said, coming up on Ghirahim's other side and bumping roughly into him as she walked past. I was on my way. She took the lead, shouting orders. You mustn't mind my sister, the ice sorceress muttered. Is she the leader of your tribe? Ghirahim asked. The ice sorceress shook her head. We are meant to rule as equals. As twins and direct descendants of our previous master, may his spirit rest in peace. His spirit, Ghirahim said. So there are males amongst you. I didn't see any. Only one is born to us every 100 years, she said. He is meant to be our true master and leader. I suppose we're a bit overdue, after the unexpected death of our last. As she prattled on, Ghirahim's gaze strayed to watch the fire sorceress. The enticing sway of her hips, the crescent moon and stars tattooed on her left shoulder, her slender yet strong figure. She whirled, granting him a warning glare, and he glanced away, tuning into the ice sorceress's words once more. It's why we take the Hylian men, for sport, for amusement. We Gerudo may be warriors, but we are still women first and foremost, and women have needs. We come here often enough, as we tire quickly of the men we choose for sport. But that's only because none are ever so alluring or refined as a great demon like yourself. She touched his arm and tilted her head, gazing up at him with a playful but intent gaze. Ghirahim cringed at how obvious already was her spellbound state. His natural allure was made to entice mortals, but he would have expected more resolve from a sorceress. He glanced again at her sister, who looked back with a glare containing all the intensity of her fire magic. Now, there was a specimen who might be worthy of conquering. He turned back to the ice sorceress, who had pouted in her sister's direction and placed a hand on her shoulder, instantly snapping her attention back to him. Even so, he said, I hardly ever come across such a rare beauty as you in the Dark Realm. Saving you is hardly a duty. It was a pleasure. A grin spread across her face. I hope I shall have more opportunity to bring you pleasure, my lord. Ghirahim smirked. No doubt. But perhaps you might first tell me where we're traveling to. He glanced out across the green fields that spanned for miles in all directions. Cliffs rose up in the far east, and in the opposite direction he could just make out the outline of a thick wood. See those cliffs there, she pointed. Beyond them lies our destination, our fortress, our home, and now yours too. If he passes the test, the fire sorceress threw over her shoulder. Sister, I think he's more than proven himself. I make no special allowances for men, not even those of the immortal variety. She cast another sharp glance back at them to declare the matter settled, and the argument ended. She doesn't trust you with as much authority for that you are meant to be equals, Ghirahim said quietly, brushing back a stray lock of her hair. She inhaled sharply, but drew her composure the next moment and said, She was ever more given to skills of leadership than myself. We shall have to remedy that. Perhaps I can teach you a thing or two on leadership, if you can grant me a tip on this test I am meant to pass. Not a word, sister, the fire sorceress snapped. The ice sorceress glared at the back of her sister's head, looking livid. I feel you watching me, Katake, the fire sorceress said. The ice sorceress sighed deeply. Katake, Ghirahim said, is that why I should call you? You may call me what you like, she said with a grin. But yes, that is my name. My sister here is Kome. I would have been more than capable of introducing myself when the time came. Katake made a face at her sister's back before continuing. As for the test, I wouldn't worry about it. After the way you tackled those Sheikah fools, passing our test will prove a cinch. Ghirahim nodded slowly. He had no fears about passing any test the Gerudo twins might throw his way. The truest test and greatest challenge would lie in his ability to persuade Kome to trust him. For, if he was to carry out his plans, he had a feeling that, with her powers and the level of command and respect she held over the other Gerudo, he would need her as an ally far more than he would need Katake in the end of things. And that is the end to Chapter 1 of Demon Queen. Thoughts, comments thus far?
There was this moment when Impa and him were fighting, where I was like, go Impa, and I'm like, oh crap, Ghirahim is the main character of this book.
Well, that doesn't, I don't know if that means that you have to cheer for him or not, though, you know?
I'm not, like, saying otherwise, it's just, it was weird.
Yeah?
I don't think I've ever read a book about the bad guy.
What do you think of Kome and Katake making an appearance?
I like them.
Yeah?
They remind me of the witches from the game.
I just said, what do you think about Kome and Katake making an appearance? We know that this is a crossover.
Yes.
With Ocarina.
Yes.
So we can imply that Impa is from Ocarina, only, you know, maybe younger. We're not sure exactly of the timeline yet, right? Well, we would assume that she's younger because obviously Kome and Katake are younger in this. So yeah, any other thoughts? Or
I very intrigued. I know that.
Any thoughts on what might happen next?
He's gonna play the two sisters against each other.
He might do something with playing the two sisters, and you know how these guys, these players, these pretty player boys, you can't trust them. Anyway, so that is the end of our reading for today. We will be doing more next week. I think I will start releasing the special Demon Queen videos on Saturdays, Saturday evenings, so keep a lookout for those. If you just can't wait to read it and you want to read the full thing, I'll put a link down below. On that note, happy reading, and I'll see you in my next video.
Goodbye.